I cannot fully explain what it was like to live in constant fear. Our lives in our home was destroyed.
I carry the reason for my victimisation around with me. Yeah, I might be able to conceal it as a gay man, but why should I?
There is no safe space for transgender people in Ireland at all.
The challenges that we face are acceptance mainly, and respect, and with respect of our religion.
It strikes at the core of who I am. Essentially, hate crimes hurt more.
Hate crime is complex, it's contested and it's corrosive. What can't be disputed is the effect it has on its victims. It can be based on race, religion, gender identity, sexuality or disability, or here in Northern Ireland, it can manifest itself through sectarianism, and it always includes an element of hatred, hostility or prejudice towards another person.
I have supported people for a range of issues, whether it's trouble from neighbours to a young student girl walking home after an evening out being stabbed in the hand with a broken bottle. All of these things are hate incidents.
There are some problems that some Polish people may encounter. So emotional scar and emotional turmoil that they have in their minds afterwards, it's really great.
I'm a transgender person who wishes to live a normal life as female, but in our society at the moment that is difficult. Hence the reason I've asked for my face to be blacked out, because society over here is just not accepting as much as we would hope.
Disabled people are often seen as vulnerable. They're seen as very different. For example, if you have a communication issue, if you're deaf and use sign language, that can be seen by some people as very threatening.
Well, from my point of view, sectarianism is where somebody violates or verbally abuses somebody because of their religion, race or political viewpoint.
I think from the community I come from, within the nationalist community, there's a historical context to it. Now, it doesn't justify it in any shape or form, but there is a historical context in terms of the creation of the state that we're living in. The Catholic Church have had major input and control of it within nationalist areas, just as much as the Orange Army would have had within, and unionist parties would have had within loyalist areas.
The challenges that we face are acceptance mainly, and respect, and with respect of our religion. We have to reach to the schools, we have to reach to the youth groups to make people aware that when you put somebody through that kind of a crime, it just wrecks your life.
So how big a problem is hate crime in Northern Ireland?
Well, hate crime's been a growing problem in Northern Ireland for about the last decade. And over about the last 6 years, the police have recorded about 13,000 hate incidents across all of the 6 categories. The largest number of incidents have been for sectarian hate crime, then racist hate crime, homophobic, religious, disability and transphobic hate crime in small numbers.
Given the extent of such incidents, in 2009, NIACRO and the Northern Ireland Prison Service decided to establish the Challenge Hate Crime Project, which was an ambitious example of partnership working.
Welcome to all of you from the different agencies who are here, because that's one of the key things that I talk about all the time, upbuilding partnerships. And I think this is a project which is an excellent example of a partnership. And it's not just NIACRO and NIPS, it's all the other bodies which are involved as well.
Research is one aspect. The second aspect is looking to develop an intervention, and Professor Jackie Bates-Gaston, who's a chief psychologist, will be working with service providers in terms of developing an intervention model.
Here in NIACRO, we were aware that hate crime was beginning to manifest itself in all its forms through several of our projects. We were also aware that in terms of addressing the behaviours of people who were engaged in hate crime, there was actually no programme in existence that did this. The project is about research and practice. We engage the services of the Institute of Conflict Research based here in Belfast. In terms of the practice, we engage the services of Mediation NI and Care Call. We also utilised the experience of VPN in Berlin. Ultimately, what we were trying to do here was to develop an intervention with perpetrators of hate crime. We were trying to develop a discourse within and beyond the criminal justice system, and the overall aim was to reduce the number of people involved in committing acts of hate crime and therefore reduce the number of victims of hate crime.
With European funding from the EU's Peace 3 programme, we developed research and practice to tackle hate crime and its impact on people and communities. At the outset, we brought together a range of people from the statutory, voluntary and community sector to talk about their experiences of tackling hatred and of being victims of hate crime. It immediately became clear that crimes motivated by hate have a huge impact on their victims and on the wider community.
Hate crimes hurt more. Not only that, hate crimes hurt people from the victims group who come to hear about the crime. People say to me, well, they hear about a hate crime, they read about it, or they hear about it, a word of mouth, they think, if it happened to them, it could happen to me. I could be next. So there's a secondary kind of vicarious victimisation. Now, again and again, when I've spoken to victims of hate crime, and people who've unravelled these psychological and psycho-emotional impacts of victimisation, I get greater and greater insight in the same story about these impacts.
So the impact of hate crime goes beyond the victim themselves. It affects others who identify with that victim through a shared race or sexuality, for example, who also feel a sense of fear that they could be targeted next. It was clear then that the justice system needed a response to hate crimes, which didn't just punish the assault, for example, because that is just the physical manifestation of underlying hatred. What was needed was a programme which addressed that hatred and changed the way people think and behave. At present, the Criminal Justice No. 2 Northern Ireland Order 2004 is the primary piece of legislation designed to tackle hate crime. It introduced longer sentences for offences based on the victim's racial group, religious group, sexual orientation or disability. But despite our troubled past, there is no mention of sectarianism in this legislation.
The flaws in the current system are essentially that the legislation isn't really fit for purpose. There's no definition of sectarianism either in the legislation or within our political class. So we need to have that definition from our politicians. An agreed definition is so important if this work is to progress.
Legislation was introduced in 2004, which allowed the courts to impose and increase sentences on people convicted of racist, religious, homophobic or disability hate crimes. It doesn't allow for an increased sentence for transphobic hate crimes, but the police have been recording such incidents for about the last 4 years. The research in Northern Ireland showed that there were very low levels of clearances of hate crime offences by the police and consequently very, very few successful prosecutions. This is in quite strong contrast with the situation in both England and Wales and in Scotland, where they've had much more success in dealing with hate crimes, both in clearing the offences and prosecuting the offenders in courts. The police record both hate incidents and hate crimes, incidents being things like name-calling and verbal abuse, and crimes more serious offences. And it's important that both types of hate offences are recorded, because it's based on what the victim feels is causing a sense of hurt and creating a problem for them in their lives.
Within criminal justice, we have to give victims the confidence to be able to come forward and report hate crime, to go to the police station, to go to statutory or voluntary bodies, to let it be known that they have been subject to a hate crime incident. Unless we do that, then there's always going to be this under-reporting. There's always going to be an issue about actually understanding what is happening out in wider society.
So what happens if you feel you're the victim of a hate crime? If someone feels they have been the victim of a crime motivated by hostility, the first thing they should do is report it to the police. The PSNI will then investigate whether an offence has been committed or not. Sometimes incidents reported to the PSNI are recorded, but no further action is taken. This may be because there is no evidence that a law has been broken, or there is insufficient evidence to support the case. If there is evidence that a law has been broken, the PSNI will also consider whether there is evidence that that offence was motivated by hate. This is important, as without the evidence of motivation, there cannot be a prosecution under the hate crime legislation.
Quite often the theme, and it's come up again today, is that the police weren't able to do anything because they couldn't get enough evidence. Critical evidence that police are looking for falls into a couple of categories, but if you could broadly categorise it as witness evidence and then maybe forensic evidence.
Once they've gathered all the evidence, the PSNI then pass a file to the Public Prosecution Service, or PPS. It is then up to the PPS to decide whether there's sufficient evidence to ensure a reasonable prospect of conviction and whether prosecuting the offence would be in the public interest.
Now, we in the PPS are completely committed to prosecuting hate crime at its height. But the problem is, do we have a reasonable prospect of getting a conviction?
In many cases, the PPS decide that whilst there is enough evidence to prosecute someone for an offence such as assault, there is not enough evidence to prove beyond reasonable doubt that it was motivated by hate. That is why a homophobic attack, for example, may eventually be prosecuted as an assault. If there's enough evidence to bring a hate crime to court, then the prosecution will seek to prove that the defendant committed the crime and that that crime was motivated by hate. Because the hate element attracts a longer sentence, defence will often accept a charge of assault, for example, but dispute that it was motivated by hate.
The whole criminal justice system relies on the shoulders largely of the victim. They were looking for, where is the graffiti in your house? Where was when they threw the stones you weren't to smash it? Why did nobody shout something like, get out you queer bastards, whatever? And because there was none of those stereotypical markers that they were looking for, I think that influenced them.
If the defendant is found guilty of the offence, they will probably be sentenced either to a period in custody or some form of community sentence. And this is where the intervention element of the Challenge Hate Crime project comes in. Because once a person has been convicted of an offence motivated by hate, we believe it is essential that the prison service and probation board have a programme available to them which can be used to tackle the underlying prejudice. But in Northern Ireland in 2009, no such programme existed. So we looked elsewhere and found that the Violence Prevention Network in Berlin had been working with young people convicted of hate crime offences for a number of years, with impressive results.
Mein Name ist Judy Korn, ich bin die Gründerin und Geschäftsführerin von Violence Prevention Network. Die Ziele des Trainingsprogramms sind zum einen, den jungen Männern die Möglichkeit zu geben, ihr Verhalten zu hinterfragen und gewaltfreie Konfliktlösungsmodelle zu lernen. Und zum anderen, und das ist der Teil, der dieses Programm von anderen unterscheidet, ihre Rechtfertigungsmuster, ihre politischen oder religiösen Rechtfertigungsmuster für die Gewalttat auch zu hinterfragen.
Mein Name ist Thomas Mück, ich habe hier die Funktion der pädagogischen Leitung. Ich bin Mitbegründer von Violence Prevention Network. In der Beziehungsarbeit ist einer der wichtigsten Punkte, dass der Jugendliche das Gefühl hat, ich interessiere mich wirklich für ihn. Für seine Geschichte, für das, was in ihm vorgeht, für seine Probleme. Auch die Sachen, die er sich nicht so immer gerne anschaut, was seine ganzen emotionalen Welten angeht. Interesse zu erfahren an seiner Person ist für ihn meistens eine neue Erfahrung. Das Zweite ist, dass ich mich nicht über diese Person stelle, sondern wir agieren in der gleichen Augenhöhe.
Wir haben in den letzten 2 Jahren auch eine quantitative Evaluation gemacht, was die Rückfallquote unserer Teilnehmer angeht. Und wir konnten feststellen, dass im Gegensatz zu der Quote von Reinhaftierten von 41% das Trainingsprogramm von Violence Prevention Network diese Quote auf 13,3% senken kann.
Also ich bin Martin Arnold und bin ehemaliger Kursteilnehmer. Also die Gruppenarbeit mit den Trainern war sehr angenehm, entspannt. Das Gute war, dass auch gleich alles per Du. Das hat dieses Arbeiten wesentlich leichter gemacht. Auch dann mit den anderen Kursteilnehmern. Früher habe ich, wie gesagt, eigentlich mehr oder weniger von Tag zu Tag gelebt. Da war es mir eigentlich relativ Bockwurst, wie meine Zukunft aussieht. Und heutzutage sieht es so aus. Ich habe vor kurzem erst geheiratet, habe Verantwortung mit 2 Kindern zu Hause. Wie gesagt, meine Zukunft möchte ich dann schon gern positiv gestalten.
Mein Name ist Izzettin Ocakci. Ich bin selber Teilnehmer gewesen des Trainings, bin heute selber Trainer und arbeite als Trainer im Gefängnis. Ich habe aus dem Trainingskurs gelernt, dass ich mich selber kontrollieren und steuern kann in Situationen, indem ich sage, ich kann mich selber steuern.
I think that international collaboration and practice exchange
is tremendously important. We also came to realize that while we expected there to be many differences in the situation and in the methods to apply, in fact the key elements of good work against hate crime and good work of de-radicalization seem to be pretty much the same, no matter with what kind of extremism you work with.
Closer to home, we looked at the experience in Scotland, where former First Minister Henry McLeish told us that the key to tackling sectarianism lay in the hands of politicians.
Well, I think there was an urgency around the Rangers-Celtic game last year, when there was a great flurry of a need to be doing something in Scotland's interest and the interests of football. And I think obviously it was important to focus on that. But there are wider issues involved, and I would like to think that the government is already taking action to say, look, sectarianism exists in communities, it exists in families, it exists in some of our more deprived areas of the West Coast, and obviously you cannot tackle it all within a football ground. So therefore I would like to think a balance will be struck now that the government will want to concentrate its focus on the question of the wider issues of sectarianism and not just concentrate on football. I think sectarianism is an issue that affects the whole of Scotland. It affects the perceptions of other people who don't live in Scotland. So I think the more we have the unit making the point of advocacy, that's important. But I think secondly, we've got to share information, share ideas. And one of the important points of it being in Northern Ireland is that other jurisdictions are doing interesting things and we should all be learning from that. If they can coordinate that, that would be helpful. And I think finally, it's not a bad idea in government to just have a symbol of what you're doing, because legislation can do a number of things. It's about practical laws, it's about doing things when problems arise, but it's also sending out big, powerful messages to the whole of Scotland and beyond. We're taking this seriously. Scotland wants to stamp this out.
So, with the benefit of that experience, we set about developing a pilot model of intervention for Northern Ireland for people convicted of an offence motivated by hostility. The pilot was delivered to 29 participants over a period of around 9 months in Hydebank Wood Young Offender Centre and McGilligan Prison.
Could you explain to me how you ended up to be in here?
Caught up in a bit of bother on the 12th of July.
Okay, and what was the nature of the bother?
Rioting.
Okay.
I did a rash behaviour, throwing a petrol bomb, one for sectarian tactics sort of.
Okay.
Well, I injured a policewoman from the riot unit. I kind of acted over my beliefs.
Charges were rioting and GBH intent.
How did you feel when you saw the parades coming up the road and the people that were marching?
I felt more anger than anything.
The pilot was delivered by trained facilitators from Care Call NI and Mediation NI and included both group work and individual support. It also extended beyond release with additional support provided in the community. The independence of the facilitators was a key factor in gaining the trust of participants, to ensure that they didn't see the programme as a further punishment, but instead as an opportunity to learn and change their thinking.
Now, in dealing with hate crime, it is important for public servants and policymakers to realize that you need independent NGO practitioners for those jobs. Because these people can reach out into areas of life that no government person will ever be able to access. They are able to speak a language, a kind of language that will be understood by the target groups, by vulnerable target groups who are severely distrustful of anybody who is official in their sense of being a state official.
But see, when we get into the first real session and we start getting into the deed of what people are talking about, it was then that they are realising that, you know, they can say whatever they want. It doesn't impact on their life here. And then they can say whatever they want and they might actually learn something. And they weren't afraid to challenge us. Quite often we would set ourselves up as the perceived other for them, to allow them and give them the opportunity to say whatever it was that they wanted back at us, so that we could then challenge their perspectives.
They also challenged one another within the group. So one would tell their story, and often we'd be questioning them and observing and feeding them back. But the others were listening, and then they would come in with a question for the storyteller, which was really, really good. And I think they all appreciated that. Yeah. And in fact, then when it came to, well, ways forward, It was also interesting that, you know, we'd often say to some of the other guys, well, what advice do you have for him? And it was really, really good. It was kind of a sense of community.
The programme's called Challenge to Change, and it is a challenge for the people we work with to confront diversity, but seeing people prepared to question themselves, prepared to question their risk factors, their vulnerability factors, and to start to want to look for different alternatives makes a big difference.
Because we have brought that different dynamic in, some of the participants are taking it into other group work that they're doing inside the prison, and they're getting more out of it as a result. And some of the officers have even commented to us about work that other people are doing and commenting how helpful it's been.
Because there are very few people in custody with convictions for offences motivated by hate or hostility, most of the participants in the programme were serving sentences for assault or public disorder offences. However, when we looked at the circumstances of those offences, it was clear that there was an element of prejudice or hostility involved.
What was the hostility that you were involved in?
Rioting.
Okay, so it was a 12th of July riot scenario. Who was your hostility against?
The police.
Okay. Where does that stem from, Gavin?
I don't know, it's just some, I've never really liked the police. Like.
So was the riot on the 12th of July an opportunity to get at the police? How did you see that?
Well, on the
Why were you there?
On the 12th of July, I just happened to be drinking, and I went up just to see what was going on, basically being nosy, and then I just seen a police Land Rover getting surrounded and stabilised where it couldn't move. So I just took my chance and tried to get them out of the Jeep and cause damage.
Was the hostility sectarian?
The hostility, it wasn't based on religion, it was just based basically on police.
So tell me about the sort of things you did on the programme that changed your thinking.
We're offered, if we wanted to maybe meet with the police to try and sort things out, or sort our problems out with the police and the police sort their problems out. It's been very valuable because before I came in here on this programme, I would have said that I would have been unsure where I was coming back to jail, but I can confidently say that if I make the changes that I want to make, then I can guarantee I'll not be back near jail again.
They have given us an insight into the ripple effect, which means that any given conflict ends up affecting more people than those involved.
Okay, okay. So you learnt more about how you became involved, what you felt before, after?
Sort of, yeah, sort of, and how to avoid to allow things to escalate again. And
you had issues with the people when you were at the riot, which involved one of them getting hurt. Now that you've come through the programme, do you have those same issues, or has your thinking changed on that?
Yeah, it has. I'd say that the programme has certainly helped because it gave me I am foreign national, I'm not from here, and I had quite a patronising view of what the North of Ireland was, and what was the role of the PSNI in Northern Ireland, which was the person I heard belongs to the PSNI. A challenge to change has been quite helpful in giving us an insight into the other side, how the other person who's living in the community in front of you might feel or might want to express their views or their cultural background. I think for those guys who remain here, that would be a great knowledge to have. After undertaking the program, I wouldn't incur on the same behaviour.
So you did an exercise where they were asking who you thought was involved in the Troubles, and you had a very particular view that in your head Protestants were at fault for wanting to march and whatever. And what did you say changed your thinking there?
Just that you hear a view from, as there was Catholic and Protestants, you heard views from Protestants, and there's two sides there were still like, whereas before I thought it was Catholics standing up for your human rights and stuff like.
What sort of things did you do on the programme that challenged that thinking that you had?
Like, if somebody from a certain community came up and said to you, alright, and you knew you were a Protestant, like, what way you would deal with it, or if you didn't really like them, how you deal with it and stuff like that.
And how would you deal with it now?
Just walk on or say alright or whatever it is. If they said alright to me, just say alright to them and walk on. No confrontation or anything anymore. Like.
So you don't feel confrontational
Nah.
Towards people from another religion now in the way
No.
that you might have?
Yeah. It's an angry person like before I came on, like it's my way or no way, like, but now I know sort of to see how all people are thinking, how all people are thinking.
Well, I feel the programmes help me more of a thinking way. When I came in here for these charges, I didn't think once about it until I started the programme. It makes me think more about the other side.
Before the programme, how did you feel when you saw the parades coming up the road and the people that were marching?
I felt more anger than anything.
Where do you think that stemmed from, Dee?
It stemmed from since I was no age, like
Right.
being more bitter about loyalists than the other side as well. From an early age growing up. I think one of the most biggest challenge was seeing it from other people's perspectives.
I suppose the big hard question is when the Orange Men come marching up your road on the 12th of July, how do you think you'll think about them differently because of what you heard on this programme?
Well, my views haven't changed, but to sit and talk about what their culture is and why they are marching gives me more time to think that it's not just about waving flags and shouting and cheering. It's about their culture.
And we explored where sectarian had come from in their lives. We explored about where they're living, family situations, history within the family, all of that. And then we kind of explored what that means for their sons, because all of them are now fathers, except one. And okay, now, is it going to be handed on to the next generation? So all of them, I feel, have come away with a sense of, this is going to be different for my son and my daughter. I'm going to make a difference for them. But
when I go out, like, I'm not being reoffended because I'm hoping to move in with my son and stay away from that there and get away from Belfast completely. Like.
So you're looking forward to getting out?
Oh, definitely.
What's going to be your motivation for trying to keep that hope alive?
The family and to stay out of jail.
What's John going to do differently when he gets released?
It's going to try and get a job and even a training scheme or something to keep me busy and not be writing. Like.
This being a pilot, we are learning as much as they are. And the delivery of it, not being part of the system, allows for freer expression. Not being part of the system allows us to become almost like a partner in that journey, as opposed to somebody that's going to be monitoring them and monitoring their behaviour. But also allows us the potential to work with them on the outside and remind them of what it was like. The flexibility that this programme offers the participants can only be to their advantage, and the flexibility that we can have as facilitators in this, it allows us the opportunity to develop ourselves and gather an understanding of what it is to be in prison. So some of that knowledge will be carried on to the next group, and the next group, and the next group. And to say this is a pilot, to me, every time you go in to do a new programme or a new group, it's always going to be a pilot, because you're going to be taking your skills that you've learned before, and you're going to be learning new skills with this new group as you go along with them.
I think for me, the success or otherwise of the programme will be judged in about a year or 18 months' time. If these guys are still out, and not only still out, but actually kind of playing a positive, reasonably positive role in society, that's the challenge. It's not how they feel in here or how we feel about the group.
It was this type of change in thinking which demonstrated the impact of this programme on people convicted of hate crime offences.
Within the prison service, we have a range of interventions in place to address criminogenic factors for offenders. However, there has been a significant gap in relation to hate crime. A significant emphasis of the programme is about challenging the perpetrator about their impact of their behaviours on particular victims about attacking somebody's identity. The perpetrator has got to understand that that is significantly difficult for individuals whenever they attack them simply because of their background.
So in September 2012, as the Challenge Hate Crime project was nearing its conclusion, we again decided to bring together an even broader range of people from the statutory, voluntary and community sector, as well as a range of local politicians, to share our learning and focus on what action could be taken to improve responses to hate crime in the future. We held a number of panel discussions, one of which included representatives from each of the relevant agencies within the criminal justice system. Having listened to the experience of victims of hate crime, they were keen to emphasise that more action was needed.
I've had this strong sense that we're not doing enough and that we're letting people down. And that's an uncomfortable position for a police officer. And quite often, we think we're doing the best we can. And it's quite humbling to hear at times that you're not just doing well enough. And for those we have let down, we really are very sorry. And we have tried very, very hard over particularly the last 12 years of police reform in Northern Ireland, to do more and more and more to put all victims at the centre of what we do. And I think we are getting better at it. But clearly we have journey to go.
We accept absolutely that the recording of these cases remains a serious problem. Even in discussion with Mark this morning, we have different figures, and that's not good enough. So in April of this year, PPS implemented a new policy which requires prosecutors to record more detailed data in relation to those cases so that we can try to really bottom out how many cases are going through the courts and on what basis. So I want to reassure you that we know the problem, we know it's a long-standing issue, and I'm sorry that I'm sitting here again a year later saying that it's not quite resolved.
There were some very stark issues there. Neil Jarman produced figures which sort of indicated that there were vast numbers of hate crimes and hate incidents reported to the police, but yet in court there was only something like 16 cases over the 4 or 5 year period that had been dealt with under the 2004 legislation. I accept that we're not measuring the same thing. I accept that when an incident is reported to the police, it's the perception test. And as Marianne's already outlined, it's not the same test that applies in court. But there is something very peculiar. I mean, there's something just not quite right about how there's such a big disparity between the figures. And that's something that I think that we'll need to look at. The Minister indicated yesterday that there would be more work taken forward in this area and a new action plan would be developed.
We need to work better in partnership. We need to make sure that what we're doing aligns with what's going on across government and make sure that we're not going down one path and find that another department, agency or body out there is doing something totally different. We need to work as best as we can. We haven't got it right internally in the Department of Justice and in the wider justice family, but we have got a will to do it and to fix it, and we haven't got it right in government, but there are discussions that are happening there at the highest level of government to try and get a better joined up approach to all social problems, including things such as hate crime. So I'm optimistic going forward.
To close the conference, we welcomed representatives of each of the main political parties in Northern Ireland, who outlined their positions on tackling hate crime and acknowledged the challenges that lay ahead.
I do not think, at the very heart of our government, that we are actually addressing sectarianism. That's my own view. And unless we do that, then we as a society will not progress.
I've been tasked by the party leader to look at a whole range of sectarian hate crime areas, and in particular how we're going to deal with the issue of flags. We're at a very beginning stage in respect to that. You might say, well, why aren't you really at the end stage of that? Well, the reality is, the reality outside the four walls of this building, it's a very complex and difficult area. And I think one of the other areas which we need to be looking at is the whole area in relation to a race discrimination strategy for Northern Ireland.
I think key, and we're absolutely genuine in this, it is party policy to go for a truly shared future where we live, work, and I think most critically of all, where we are educated together.
So the call is to ask people to come forward, let us know what they would like to see happen and what they need to see happen at a policy level, and we are happy to support that as far as we can as well.
I think even as elected representatives,
and people who are in public life have a duty to be responsible in the language they use about that. And I mean, one obvious example is my former party colleague Ken McGuinness, who many had no disagreement with Ken's remarks as they were about gay marriage or his objection to same-sex marriage, but when he went off into the other bestiality comments were just absolutely appalled. But so I do think there's a duty on us all to be careful about the language we use.
And we as, I think, all sectors of society, I think we as politicians have a big role to play as well in what we say, because it can be construed and used by other groups and individuals. The PSNI, who I believe also is in transition, I think they need to, there's some behaviour and mindsets needs to change there.
The fact is, if a person is attacked because he is a gay person, that's the motivation for the crime. And that's the distinction that's been made in hate crime. It's the motivation for that crime. And if the motivation is racist or homophobic or sectarian, it is odious. And society is saying, society is making a very strong statement that this is unacceptable behaviour and must be dealt with severely.
So, given all that we have learned through the Challenge Hate Crime project, what can we now do differently to encourage more people to report incidents motivated by hate, to improve the justice system's response, and to reduce the number of people affected by hate crime?
It's clear from the evaluation of the programme that there are significant learning points for the criminal justice system. Again, it is about identification of hate crimes, the reporting of hate crimes, the acknowledgement that it is a major issue within society, that victims largely don't perceive that the hate crime is being dealt with appropriately and that they are getting justice from the system. So it is about making sure we have a process and a procedure that from the time of arrest until the time of disposal, people are prosecuted, are dealt with under a hate crime banner or flag.
I think looking back over the 3 years of this project, it's been quite educative in terms of our understanding that really sentencing people to either longer periods of imprisonment or even sentencing more people isn't the answer. We need really to examine why people are committing these crimes, look at the motivations, the hostility and the prejudice that underpins those motivations. What we need going forward is clear political leadership to review the legislation that we currently have, ensure that it's fit for purpose, and really to examine what we mean when we are talking about sectarianism so that we know that we are dealing with the same thing across the board.
So whilst we've learned a lot through the Challenge Hate Crime programme, one of the key indicators of success is the clear commitment that now exists within each of the criminal justice agencies and across the political parties to doing more to tackle such incidents in the future. In the meantime, we hope that the pilot model we trialled within the prisons will be adapted and developed for use by the justice system to reduce the likelihood of reoffending and the impact of hate crime on people and communities.
We've shared the opportunity and the platform together, but it really is now down to you as to where you go from here, the effort you put in.
Okay, thank you. And well done, guys.
Thank you.